So that, my friends, is the axephone.
Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, and we're joined today by a friend of the program and really accomplished musician and original merry prankster, George Walker. Have a seat. Welcome, my friend.
Indeed. Well, thank you.
Before you just explain to the audience what that apparatus. George was a monster drummer, but he invented an axephone. Why don't you break down what that is?
This was a stage prop when we were doing the Twister show with Kesey. I was the Tin Man, and as a Tin Man, you got to have an axe. And the play was a musical, and so I had to turn an axe into a musical instrument, which, as you know, the jazz musicians would refer to their horns as their axes. Hey, I got my axe, man. Blow some blues. And so that's what I did, and I kept doing it. And the more I played it, the more I enjoyed playing it. So now I've gotten good enough that there are a few bands that are silly enough to let me play with it. But it's got, the head of it is something I made. It's just an axe handle and the remnants of an old C melody saxophone. And for people who are interested in history, this saxophone, the pieces of it, was one of the instruments that we had on the bus in 1964.
It was a saxophone.
It was a saxophone, yeah. It was a C melody saxophone, which is kind of a useless horn. Nobody plays them anymore. They don't use them in almost hardly anything, probably. I bought it in a pawn shop in Oakland for $20 in 1964, and played it for a while until everybody told me to shut the hell up because it was terrible sounding. But it lay around for years and years until we were doing Twister, and I had to come up with this thing. So I found it lying around, moldering around somewhere in one of the buildings around Kesey's, and took it apart and put the pieces of it on there to make it look like something.
I remember in our first interview you talked about Twister being kind of a the theme was the end of the world.
Well, in a way it was.
Can you talk about why that was the slant and juxtapose that to where we are today with civilization?
Yeah, well, it was a musical, kind of a comedy, but it was dark, dire stuff. My character, the Tin Man, was rusted and broken and leaking oil, and ultimately turned out that has AIDS. So, and everybody that was in it, there were different acts and the different roles of the different acts. Every one of them was about some kind of dire consequences that the Earth was coming to, or could come to. And
could you give an example of one?
Well, like the thing that I was doing, my act was about viruses. We had this song that it was to the tune of from The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
So we came up with this alphabetical list of diseases that we went through backwards, starting with the Z's, and the dialogue is all about that. Zymogenic infestation, whooping cough and complications, yellow fever and yaws. And it was a duet. The woman, unfortunately, that did it with me passed away a couple of years after we were doing it. Carol Provence, she got cancer and didn't survive it, but she played the Good Witch. There were a lot of Wizard of Oz characters in it. We had a Dorothy and even had a dog, a little Toto dog. Then we also, Ken Babbs played the Frankenstein monster, and various people, sometimes Simon Babbs and sometimes other people. Huey Lewis played at one time, played Elvis, and so there was this cast of strange...
Huey's stepdad was a beat poet. I mean, how did Huey get involved with that?
He was in town when we did it. In fact, it was our first show. We did our first show here in Eugene. 2 nights. We did 2 shows in 2 nights. The Dead were in town. And, Huey used to work here. He used to work at Chuck Kesey's Creamery, the Springfield Creamery.
Huey Lewis did?
Yeah, before he became a famous musician. He was maybe driving a truck or something for Chuck. So he had a history in Eugene, and I don't know quite why he was in town. Maybe to go to the Dead concert that was here, because it was a big scene. And anyway, we got in touch with him, and he came and performed a couple nights of Twister.
You know, George, talking to original Merry Prankster, George Walker here, such a beautiful cat. We recently lost a cat who I interviewed a few months ago, not a couple years ago, and he sang the lyrics to Moanin'. His name is John Hendricks.
Oh yeah. Well, that was one.
I mean, can you talk about? I mean, first of all, explain to the audience. As a prankster, you were a jazz, fanatic, and you guys used to play Bobby Timmons' "Moanin'" on the bus. Is that right?
Yeah, and in fact, the dialogue. Kesey had written a bunch of dialogue, and the dialogue for my character, the Tin Man, was about moaning.
Oh, they're going back to Twister.
Yes.
Really?
That's where we got into it.
I love it.
Because and Ken didn't know or didn't remember the song, but it was my dialogue had to do with moaning to get over whatever it is you're getting over, and so I said, Ken, I've got the perfect song for this, and so I went down to the record store and found a CD of the Lambert Hendrickson Ross. It was their first, the first one that they did, the first one of their CDs. That had that song on it, Bobby Timmons' tune, Moanin', and Hendricks wrote lyrics to it. It was written as a piano piece. Timmons was a piano player, played a lot with the Jazz Messengers.
Blakey,
exactly, and Horace Silver. In fact, I had thought it was a Horace Silver song until I was corrected on that. But anyway,
yeah.
The song with the lyrics goes... every morning find me moaning, yes, Lord, 'cause of all the trouble I see. Life's a losing gamble to me, cares and woes have got me moaning. Then there's a bridge and it goes, every evening find me moaning, I'm alone and crying the blues. And I can't remember all the words, but anyway, that's the song, and we put that song into the Twister play. And I'm sad to know that John Hendricks died. I think I knew that. He died a couple of years ago, didn't he?
No, he just died.
Oh, he just died?
Yeah, he was. Okay. He was. I interviewed him a few years ago.
You interviewed him 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about. This is just, you can riff on this. He said to me in our interview, without the Sicilians, there would be no jazz in America. They didn't treat us. He said they didn't treat us like niggers. They would go up.
I saw. I guess it was in your.
Well, if you can listen, and I wanted you to talk about as it related to San Francisco as well. I mean, was the mob or the Sicilians primarily responsible for melodic improvisation in the United States?
I don't know.
I know you don't know.
I don't know.
I just looking for your opinion, man.
I don't even have an opinion.
That's what Hendricks. Hendricks said they would rub his head. And they would do it for good luck.
I just saw that recently, yeah.
Right. You saw that on my post.
I saw that on your posting just recently. I saw that, and I thought, well, that's cool. But yeah, a lot of the jazz scene in San Francisco was in North Beach, which was very much an Italian enclave. I wasn't aware of mobsters in those days. I've since got to know a few of them, but in any case. If there were mobsters hanging around San Francisco, that's probably where they would have been hanging out, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they owned those clubs, because a lot of the various clubs all around the country are owned by mobsters, going way back to Prohibition days, because they had the liquor, so they would have the clubs. And I imagine that they carried that on after Prohibition ended, that they stayed in that business, because they always had to find something legitimate to make it look good.
Was a cat like Hendricks, like his word, he was such a wordsmith. I mean, was he, even though Kesey might not have been hip to, but was he one of those cats, I mean, that you guys enjoyed the prose and the poetry that he was riffing on, or you specifically?
Well, I did. I was very much a fan of their whole thing, Lambert Hendrickson Ross.
Right.
I had all their music. I listened to it a lot. I loved what they were doing. I loved the idea that they could take these really cool tunes and... hi, come on in.
Oh, are you doing an interview?
Yes.
No, are you sure?
Yes.
I mean, I know you're doing it, but I didn't mean to interrupt. Hi, excuse me.
Hi, this is Jeannie Murphy.
How you doing?
She's one of my neighbors.
Nice vest.
Go ahead. I mean, this is wonderful. I mean,
so-
but I mean, you know.
Call me.
Okay, I'll see you later.
See you later.
Nice to meet you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I've got to run up to Normals, now I'm going to a basketball game, so I'm not going to be around very much.
What time are you going to Normals?
I got to be there at 4.
Oh, it's 3:15.
Yeah, I know.
I
So we got
gotta
half
come
an hour.
back in about 15 minutes.
Busy day, like I was saying. But yeah, they took all these songs, and another one that I really liked was Twisted. My analyst told me that I was right out of my head the way he described it. He said I'd be better dead than live. I didn't listen to his jive. And that was Annie Ross that sang that with beautiful soprano voice. And she was so cool. She was white, which I didn't know until I saw pictures of them, because, you know, they all, you know, John Hendricks and Dave Lambert were black, and I just assumed that Annie Ross was too. This trio
Right,
sang
interesting,
together.
interesting.
But she's not. She was kind of a redhead and a very beautiful woman.
Can you talk to the audience about the lag, Neil Cassidy? The way you were riffing right there was the way Neil talked. Can you talk about Cassidy and the lag and
Yeah, in fact, I have quite a rap on that I've been telling people.
Do it.
I was watching on television several months ago, and a guy came on. He was a scientist. He was a brain scientist, and he was studying cognition, but not from the viewpoint of like a psychiatrist or psychologist. He was looking at it from like brain waves, you know, what was the physics of what was going on. And what he was able to figure out was that everything we perceive first goes into our subconscious, and then our subconscious filters it and massages it and eliminates almost all of it, and then puts the rest of it together and feeds it into our consciousness, and that's our reality, this construct that our subconscious creates for our consciousness. But that takes time, not very much. But he said there's a process that goes on, because it's a physical thing that's happening. There are neurotransmissions going on within your brain that are related to this creation of this reality construct that we all live within and think of as the universe. It's actually a very tiny, tiny little piece of it, just like what we perceive is narrow wavelength bands. The visual wavelengths are huge, and we see a little narrow thing. Same with sound. We hear from 20 to 20,000 cycles or less as we get older, and you know, it goes from 0 to 100,000 cycles. So we're only seeing little narrow wave bands of this. Everything else is just eliminated because it's too much for us.
go back to Cassidy? So I mean,
Well, this gets to that.
yeah, go ahead. I mean, people are loving this, by the
Yeah.
way. Keep the comments coming in.
Yeah,
dude.
this gets to
People are loving Walker's smile, man.
Yeah, and what happens then is this takes time for this process to happen. He thought as much as 1/10 of a second. We had figured out it was quicker than that. It's about 1/30 of a second. Cassidy always talked about 1/30 of a second. There were times when you could even perceive it, like on DMT, you can see it.
Right.
You actually can see that happening because you see both parts. You see the initial perception, and then you see the constructed perception that's fed to us 1/30 of a second later. And it creates a sense of deja vu. Everything on DMT seems like deja vu, because it is. We actually did perceive it in the past, but it was so recently that you can't see the amount of time, that 1/30 of a second. Sometimes driving a car, if something really terrible is about to happen, you can jump past that, and you can react from your subconscious to save yourself. I've done it 3 or 4 times. I've seen Cassidy do it a couple times. But what
Can you talk? Because he was an insane driver. I mean, he'd be turning around, he'd be doing multitasking, talking to 3 people at once.
He was. Well, we'll get a little into that here in a minute.
Yeah.
What that means, though, is that because of that 1/30th of a second lag, we can never be here now. Sorry, Ram Dass, but
You knew Ram Dass.
Oh,
you bought
very well.
you bought acid from Ram Dass.
yes, indeed, we were very good friends. We got high together a number of times and did stuff together. I really liked him a lot. He was a great guy.
But it prevents you from being here now, is what you were saying.
Yes, you because our consciousness is of really, it seems like the present, but it's really of the past, a 30th of a second in the past, but it's still the past. What that also means, probably, is that you can't do anything. Because to do anything, you can't do anything in the past. You can only do anything in what seems like the present. But the present is, your perceived present is really the past, a 30th of a second ago. And so to actually do something in the present would be to change the past. And it's pretty much accepted that you can't change the past. It's done. So that creates this real problem. Where did all this shit come from? If we can't do anything, who made all this? But what that really, but the answer to the paradox is just as simple. Time itself is part of that illusion, is part of that perception. And so our perception of time is also illusory. So time itself is a construct of our mind. And everything, time is only something of this dimension. It isn't an absolute. This is all very Einsteinian. It's all very relative.
This is legit, man. It's the farthest thing from psychology or psychiatry. This is, you know,
absolutely.
But did this concept for you begin at the Monterey Jazz Festival with Ornette Coleman when you saw him drop the bar line? I mean, you didn't really get your hands on any real LSD till '64.
Right.
But you realized...
I had been taking psychedelics for years, but just not LSD.
The Sandoz stuff that Kesey...
I've been taking various kinds of stuff that I didn't know what it was. I ate peyote a lot of times.
Right.
I had eaten a lot of peyote. I'd taken mushrooms. I'd taken psilocybin. I'd taken various of those chemicals that Kesey got from the VA hospital experiments. You know, stuff with names like IT-290 and MP14.
MK Ultra.
Yeah, the MK Ultra project.
But going back to Ornette, the dropping when the no TikTok time when he dropped the bar lines. I mean, that was was that a revelation to you?
Not really. I kind of knew all that stuff in a way.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you know it?
Well, I was a philosophy major. I delved deep in my thoughts into logic. I'd come to the conclusion that Aristotle did the world a great disfavor in quantifying logic as two-valued, true and false, black and white, yes and no, that in truth, logic should be infinitely valued, and even wrote papers to that effect. And so I was into a lot of this stuff in my head for years before I ever saw Ornette Coleman.
Wow. Unbelievable. Talking to George Walker here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Keep the comments coming in. This guy is waxing poetic. Do you have the same take as Babs in the sense that you guys did the trip across the country? You videotaped the whole thing.
Not video. It was on
16
film. It was on film.
It was on film.
16 millimeter film.
And you were geeked up because you guys were going to put this together, and it was the first real on-the-road documentary film of this kind. You were getting off, it was one-lane highways all the way through, and you come back, and the audio and the video don't sync up. And it didn't, but actually what Babs says is that our failure was our biggest blessing. And I just wonder what your takeaway was from that whole experience, including the film.
Well, a lot of takeaways from it. I didn't see that as being as great a problem as the people that were later really delving into trying to turn it into a product. At first, we kind of played with it. You know, we cut the film up to show it to the acid test and stuff. We had vastly more tape than we did film. You know, sound tape. For one thing, it's a lot cheaper, and you don't have to process it. You just run it through the tape recorder and record. And so we had many hours of sound recordings, much of which I think is probably still lying around somewhere and never been listened to. It wouldn't surprise me to find a box of tapes that nobody ever heard in 60 years, 50 years, but I don't know that, but I suspect as much. But yeah, it was a technological problem, but a bigger technological problem was that we were just really damn bad at what we were doing.
Hagen was running that thing.
Yeah, and he was the worst. We were really good at picking the worst people to do things.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's beauty in the worst stuff.
Yeah, well, yeah, and a lot. That's a lot of who we are. That's a lot of our charm is that we weren't competent. Had we been competent, we'd have just been one more band or one more movie company or one more bunch of people out cruising around. We were so bad at what we did that we fell into a different realm. Our film was. Much of the film was badly focused. It was all jumpy and, cameras moving around all the time and not paying any attention to what you're filming, just, looking around, holding the camera that's running and stuff like that. Found out later that Ron Bevert, we called him Hassler, he did all the still photos on the trip, and they're magnificent. He was really good. Found out later that he actually had studied filmmaking in college and was very competent, but he just didn't want to assert himself. And had he asserted himself and said, "Give me that damn camera, I'll show you how to do it,"
he would have been competent.
He'd been very competent. He was extremely competent, and had he done that and just yanked the camera out of Hagen's hand, and out of my hands, and out of everybody else, Kesey's hand, everybody else's hands that didn't know what the hell we were doing. I knew a little bit. I knew what f-stop meant and stuff like that, depth of focus, but just barely. And at that, I probably knew a little more than Hagen. But Hagen was the one that had the real interest. He was really motivated. And so he was the one that did it. He went and got a camera. He was the one that started filming even before the bus trip. And then he got me started filming. We both had 8mm cameras. I had an old wind-up Kodak from the 1930s that had been my father's. And we're shooting films and cutting them up and bringing them out to Kesey's and showing them on Saturday night when we were all getting high. And that was where we really started, was Hagen and I making these little 2 and 3 minute films that we'd come and show. But he was really dedicated, and he was reading magazines and finding out better equipment. He was always getting a better camera and better this and better that, and trying to upgrade. And of course he was right. The problem was that he didn't really know quite how to educate himself, how to really be really good at doing it, at the act of filming. He had the stuff and he knew he wanted to do it.
He had the passion, but not necessarily the technical chops to do it.
Right, and he didn't quite have whatever it takes to learn that, and none of us did, other than Hassler, who already had done it and was just shooting stills, which, like I say, are magnificent. They're just wonderful, and there are several books that have those stills in them, and they're beautiful.
Walker, this is so important to talk to the peeps out there. People are loving this interview, by the way.
Well, good.
And
well, we love all you. I love all you people out there.
Of course,
it's all about love, people. It's all about love.
And the thing is that what Hendrix told me, the mob ran this Waiters and Bellman's Club in Toledo, Ohio. Tatum and Hendrix had their start there.
Uh-huh.
Every time Dizzy would come through and he was leaving the club, they'd all say to each other, "Don't forget about the blues. Don't forget about the blues," right? Okay, so here's what I want you to talk about. The time that you saw Dizzy and Rahsaan Roland Kirk in the early 60s, what you've described as psychedelic jazz, okay, this was not bebop, okay, but there were blues melodies in it, and it was completely off the wall. And I want you to go deeper into what was so profound about it, because in my mind, when you go see jazz today, and we're talking about longevity, guys that would have been dead in the 60s, they're still alive today, they're still cranking, they're making better money than ever before, but it is so predictable. And there was nothing predictable about you with Rahsaan and Diz. So why don't you break that down?
Yeah, I had never heard, he wasn't even Rahsaan yet. He was just Roland
Kirk. And he had like an alto sax, but a bunch of other things that he made.
I had never heard of him. I went to see Dizzy. I'd seen Dizzy once before, and I loved his music. I had a lot of his records, and I really loved bebop, and I listened to a lot of Diz and Bird, and I loved that music. And so I went to see Dizzy at the Jazz Workshop in San Francisco on Broadway. And so I went by myself, just go and dig it, and because I used to do that.
Oh yeah, you were already in it, man.
Yeah, and so I went and sat down, and I was used to the jazz scene, which is people sit around kind of quietly and sip their drinks, and in those days you smoked cigarettes in clubs, and I don't think anybody was smoking dope. I didn't smell any, but you never know. But
Dizzy might have been.
I'm sure the musicians all were, in between sets. They'd had to have been.
Roasting, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, so I sit down and, ready to listen to some jazz. And here's this little blind guy, Roland Kirk, and he's got 3 horns that he's playing. He's got a regular saxophone. I can't remember if it's an alto or a tenor. And then he's got a couple of other things that kind of led me into the axephone. There were things that he'd made himself out of bits and pieces of stuff, taped together and string on them, holding them, and rubber bands and crap on them. And he wouldn't just play them alternately. He'd play them all at once, 2 or 3 of them. And he had a thing. Hold on a second.
Now, Babs had a couple of interruptions with phones as well. I mean, you're being.
I'm turning off my phone.
It's all right. Yeah.
Stop this. Hold on a minute here.
Yeah.
Time out.
No, we're live worldwide. People are all over this, man.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sorry about my phone here. People worldwide. I'm trying to fix it. Oh, shit.
I just should say to the audience, Walker's story about Dizzy and Rassan was like a mind-blowing experience for me because it was a rock concert. It was not a jazz concert.
Well, it wasn't a rock concert. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. First of all,
let's look at the camera. Let's get the phone away.
Yeah, I'm just trying to turn it off.
Yeah.
It takes me a minute to get it to where I can. It's. I'm just going to shut it up here.
Yeah.
It'll just take a minute. There we go. It's. Okay.
All right.
Sorry about that. Apologies.
All right, we're back. Let's bump. Let's bump
it
back.
So pretty soon, here's this guy, and he is just playing his ass off, and people are not sitting quietly like you expect at a jazz club. People are standing up and dancing and getting on their chairs and yelling and screaming and going crazy. And the place, it's like a Dead concert 10 years later. People are up and going at it and just going wild and crazy and screaming and yelling, and the place is bedlam. And I thought, holy shit, this is what's happening, because the music was still rooted in jazz, but it was so free, and they were blowing so hard, and they were just going off with this stuff, that the excitement of it, the musicians were all excited, and the crowd got excited, and pretty soon it was just a frenzy building, and it was like a wild scene, and I'd never ever seen anything like that of any sort.
Was the drummer playing a rock beat, or was he?
No.
I'm still trying to envision people. I mean, they were dancing to this.
Well, they were just up and moving.
Yeah, right.
You can dance to jazz. It's got a beat.
Yeah.
Rock is rooted in jazz. It went from, march music to marching jazz music in New Orleans. The
Dixieland,
the Dixieland,
the banjo, yeah.
And then you get Louis Armstrong showing people how you can really blow, and then it just kept building from that, and more and more, and then into the blues and into rhythm and blues, and then to rock and roll, and there's a steady progression from early jazz to rock and roll, and a lot of the stuff now, like these jam bands. I play in a jam band. In fact, the place I'm going right away after this, over to Normal Bean's house, I play in his band.
Oh, I might have to come over there.
And it's a jazz band.
What does jazz mean, though? But I mean, that name has been perverted. I mean, what is jazz? Isn't jazz a combination of all musics?
Really, yeah. It's well. I'm going to give you a Kesey quote. That's not a quote. It's not his quote, but he quoted Charlie Parker.
Yeah, you already told me this. Yeah. I don't want to go over this whole time because you can play all that fancy stuff, but can you play? Where's the soul?
What he said was, "I'm hip. You can twiddle your fingers, man, but can you play the blues?"
Explain that to the worldwide audience, because everyone's like, I play blues.
Yeah, it's really simple. Charlie Parker played fast and furious. Bebop was like twice as fast as what people have been playing. Really, really fast. But it's still rooted in the blues. And so young cats would come up, they'd come up on stage, they have a lot of, like open mic stuff, Sunday afternoon, okay, anybody come up and play. So some young cat would come up and he'd just be playing all over the place. But it's just notes. There's nothing. There's no soul to it. There's no blues to it. And this is what Bird was saying to him. Come on, man. I'm hip. You can move your fingers fast, but play some blues. Play something. Do something that's got some soul. Something that's got something behind it. and that's what he meant, and that's where jazz leads into rhythm and blues, and then rock and roll. Really good rock and roll has blues in it. Garcia listened to Coltrane a lot. Of course, everybody did, but Coltrane was like, he took that to the extreme on the tenor sax. And Garcia, you can see a lot of the same kind of licks.
This is
similar kind of bending of notes.
Oh, absolutely. No, this is so important because this is the thing. With LSD, you talked so eloquently in our radio interview about this river of consciousness. But what I really I want you to talk about in your own world and with Garcia as well, how the LSD helped you and people like Garcia perceive music.
It frees you up. LSD frees your mind from preconceived notions.
What kind of notions?
Well, ideas that you play in a certain key all the time, or you play in a certain rhythm, or the progressions are such and such. I don't know enough music. I don't read music. I can read the timeline.
Yeah, you have feel. Yeah,
I can read the timeline because I was a drummer and had to learn that when I was in school. But the various notes, I don't know how to read that, but I know that there are kind of standard chord changes that you go through, and this is all kind of learned stuff. And jazz is about bending around that. A number of people have said that the notes you don't play in jazz are just as important as the ones you do, because that's what gives it that syncopated rhythm. Back to Cassidy. I've been doing Cassidy reading performances this year, and a lot of the reason that I'm able to do that is because I know the rhythm. Neil listened to jazz.
Yeah.
Growing up,
right.
From the time he was a teenager, all through, he was always listening to jazz, and he had those rhythms in his head, and so his speech had those rhythms. He'd be talking, and there'd be this syncopation. There'd be a beat to everything he was saying. He wouldn't just be talking. He'd be saying this, and then this, and then this. And you get this sense of a rhythmic flow. And he'd be moving to it, too. And all this stuff is happening. It's kinetic, and he's happening. And he's driving a car, and he's doing this, and he's doing this, and he's doing this, and he's moving all over the place, and he's driving this and turning this way, and doing all these things. And it's all rhythmic. There's a jazz beat behind all this stuff because that was in his head, and the reason I'm able to do what I do with Neil's stuff is I know those rhythms. I listened to all that music, and listening to Neil and spending all that time with him, I could see that rhythm in what he was doing, and that's what makes it effective. Kerouac was that way too, and my partner in these readings, Brian Hassett, he reads the Kerouac parts, and I read the Neil parts. We recently were listening to a Kerouac tape and reading some stuff, and some of it was the same stuff from these dialogues out of On the Road that Brian and I are reading. And so I'm listening to the same stuff that Brian's been reading, and I realize Brian's got it too. He really has that rhythm of Jack's speech. Like I have the rhythm of Neil's speech. And so when we do these dialogues, it really sounds like Jack and Neil talking. And people pick up on that, and they say, wow, that's far out. You guys really bring this to life, which is what we're trying to do. We're not trying to be like college professors reading out of a book and just going through the lines and reading them stuff. I hear people read like that, and then we read the same stuff, and it sounds completely different, because we bring it to life with these rhythms.
Do you think that vocabulary in music can grow in academia?
Oh, absolutely.
Or because I think that the music vocabulary grew the most on the bandstand with these cats. I mean, where the cats were relentlessly playing every night, and chances are they were in a band 2 weeks at a time, playing in the workshop. But the idea that in academia, with all the saturation of material that's out there might be even a George Walker book on drums out there for all we know.
No, there's not.
But what you're talking about before is when we talk about keeping the soul in the music. What I find now is I haven't been to see your band, but a lot of times I wind up staring at the wall when I go see jazz because it's huge facility and no soul. So we're sort of in that pre-bebop era again in some ways, and I'm looking now, these places have become chop shops. I want you to explain why you think vocabulary music can be expanded in academia.
Well, I think it can be expanded anywhere. I think the setting, I don't think is the limitation. I think people's minds are the limitation.
Absolutely. Oh, amen.
I think that people who are free in their minds, who are open to experimentation, to reaching out, to trying to go farther, I think that no matter where you are, if that's the way your mind is, in anything you do, not just music, but in any endeavor, if you're free and you're reaching out, you can do it anywhere. I think that limitations are things we put on ourselves.
I'd like you to just talk to the audience about what you're still learning about yourself and how you're evolving as a human being.
Oh man, I have learned so much about myself this last year. It's really kind of blown my mind. Doing these Cassidy readings, I knew really well the last couple of years of his life. I spent probably the last year of his life, I spent more time with him than anybody. We went and spent several months together in Mexico, just the two of us with a couple more friends, and got him off of speed a lot of the time, and we just sit around and have conversations, play cards, relax on the beach, do stuff like this, and I kind of got him away from this frantic character that he had morphed into by everybody saying, oh, be Dean Moriarty for me, do On the Road for me, be this character. And he had been pigeonholed into being this character.
And it drove him crazy.
Well, it affected him. Yeah. It kind of drove him crazy. And he was trying to accommodate people because he was so accommodating. And so it wasn't really productive for him to be that way. And so I kind of got him off of that and got to know him. And I kind of realized that, there's depth to him that is beyond almost everybody we know. He was an amazing guy.
How is that affecting your evolution?
Well, here's how it affected me. I'm glad you brought me back to that.
Yeah.
Doing this reading about him, I've come to realize how much like him I am in a lot of ways.
Oh, beautiful.
I don't act frenetic and talk nonstop, and I do kind of drive that way. But what it is it's a couple of things. One is he was very self-analytical, and I'm very much that way. I have a very analytical mind. Like right now, I'm analyzing.
Oh, you're rocking.
Yeah, and I do this. And
people are having a ball out there, dude.
And I find myself as I'm getting ready to go to one of these shows and be Neil for a couple hours, I find myself going through all these machinations, like I'm planning where I'm going to go, who I'm going to see, how am I going to work this place in with this place, with these people, I got to go see this guy, and like today I have to see you, then I got to go see Normal, then I got to go to a basketball game, I got to call Bob back and find out what time we're going, I've got to get ready for tomorrow to play tomorrow. And Cassidy was always working through this stuff. A typical day for him, he might drive 150 miles around the Bay Area and see 20 different people. And he's plotting, planning, scheming, all this stuff. Who's he going to get laid by? Who's going to have some dope? Who's going to feed him? Who's going to have gas money? Where am I going to get to go?
Scheming, constantly scheming.
Constantly scheming in just, working through his life. And I think, God, I do that too. And I'm finding more and more ways that I'm like him. And I mentioned this to people, that knew us way back. Like Jane Burton, I told her, and she said, "Oh, I always thought you were like Neil, only not crazy." And I thought, really? But it has been by doing this and studying how he was analyzing himself, I find myself doing the same thing.
Driving 150 miles around Eugene to...
Well, becoming aware of how much I'm self-analyzing and how I'm plotting and planning and analyzing what it is that I'm doing, and realizing this. And also working with Brian Hassett doing the shows, he's very much like Jack. He's got books filled with notes. We sit and talk, and he's taking notes, and we talk on the phone, and he's taking notes, and he'll write a whole article while I'm talking to him on the phone, frantically taking notes, and he keeps track of everything, and he plots and plans everything, and does all of the organizing and arranging, and all I got to do is show up, which seems a little unfair to me, but I realized that Jack was like that. Jack, kept copious notes constantly, books full of it, and Brian does that. And so he's the perfect Kerouac character. And I just show up wild and crazy and do my thing. Very Cassidy-like. You know, I just drive up and show up and say, okay, where are we, boss? I'm ready. We can do this. And we do. And it's always really good.
Did you, before I let you go, I know, you have a lot to do.
No
just
problem.
two-part question here. Can you talk to the audience about the hovels that existed in Menlo Park that Kesey lived in, and if you knew any of the avant-garde artists that lived there as well? And number two, for the record, for people watching worldwide, I want you to talk to them about the first time that it snowed on Penny Lane. Perry Lane.
Yeah.
When you ate a tab of that, your first tab of acid.
It wasn't acid, it was peyote.
Peyote, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So peyote on Perry Lane and the hovels in Menlo Park. Riff on that.
The what in Menlo Park?
It was World War I housing.
Oh yeah.
You dig?
Yeah, the hovels. Yeah,
the hovels.
Okay.
I knew I was. Yeah, the hovels.
Yeah, I didn't catch
the hovels. So the hovels and Penny.
Well, they were just little tiny cabins. Perry Lane was this kind of a side street, right a block from the main street that goes past Stanford campus and out past the Stanford golf course and eventually out toward the coast. And Perry Lane was just a block from that, and so it was just like a block and a half from the Stanford golf course, but it was just kind of a little tree-lined lane, and there were a dozen or so little tiny like one-bedroom cottages, and it's my understanding that these little houses had been moved there right after World War I, that they had been built as military barracks over in East Palo Alto, and then moved
because they were shipping stuff off from the Pacific Coast. Is that why they had military housing there?
Well, they were built. They were just World War I, and there were millions of people involved, and they were housing people. They were.
It's irrelevant. It became an avant-garde haven, though.
Yeah, and they were cheap. It was probably the cheapest place to live. Probably after World War II, they were probably $5 a month or something. And,
right.
And in the '60s, they were probably $50 a month. Something really cheap. I mean, you could rent a house for $100 a month then. So they were probably $30 or $40 or $50 a month. They were cheap. Artists are always starving and looking for cheap housing, and it was convenient, and it had been that way all way back since Thorstein Veblen lived there in the 1920s, and all kinds of people over the decades. The avant-garde bohemian culture tended to center around there, and so it was natural that in the 60s it was Kesey and Vic Lovell, who was at Stanford in the psychology program, Jane Burton, who was in the philosophy program, Jim Waltman, who had just graduated from law school and was involved in all the avant-garde stuff, Ram Bondoc, who was still in law school. In fact, I've just written a thing about the fact that when Cassidy first showed up on Perry Lane, everybody thought he was coming, in retrospect, thought he was coming to see Kesey because he had read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it actually hadn't been published yet. And he didn't know anything about Kesey. He was coming to see Ram Bondoc, who always had weed.
He was coming to see Bondoc.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, this is new news. I just discovered all this within the last month or so, or two myself.
Wow.
And I've just written a thing about it that's in Brian Hassett's new book, How the Beats Begat the Pranksters. So read that book, find that book and read it. It's brand new and it's really, really good. A couple things in it that I wrote.
A Perry Lane peyote snowing in San Francisco.
So anyway, my first friends were Peter Dema and his sister and a couple of their friends lived in Redwood City. So when I first got there, I looked them up. I'd met them. His sister had been up here that spring to visit Kesey because they'd all been hanging around Perry Lane, although they didn't live there. Well, it turned out that they had a rented house and they had some peyote growing in their garden. It was in December because it snowed. It was close to Christmas.
You're able to grow peyote year round, or?
Oh yeah, well it's a cactus,
Right. I should know that. I'm in the desert.
It grows for years.
Yeah.
It takes years to grow it, and they'd had this peyote growing for several years, and there it was in their yard. And they said, "Well, let's eat this." It was actually a nice, warm, sunny day in December, which you often get in the Bay Area. So we chopped the tops off of several peyote plants, little cactus. They have a little bud on top of it, and you cut those off. And we just chopped it up and put it in a blender and made this horrible tasting drink, this green, awful, bitter stuff, and we all drank it down. and got really, really high, and then it started getting late in the day, and then it started getting cold, and then we started thinking, well, let's go over the lane and see what's going on over there. And I think we were at Jim Waltman's house. He lived right across the street from Kesey's on the lane, and Ken wasn't there then. That was when Bondoc still had the house. This was in December of '61. And we're hanging around and sitting around inside, and just kind of watching the walls glow and stuff like that. And somebody said, "Hey, look outside! It's snowing!"
Snowing in San Francisco.
Yeah, snowing in Menlo Park, Palo Alto. We're probably 30 feet above sea level, and sure enough, there's a half inch of snow. It's sticking on the ground, and we're out in it, and there's street lights overhead, and all this snow is falling down, and we're hallucinating all these colors in it, and it's drifting around like this, and all this shit's going on. It was kind of unbelievable. And I think it's maybe the only time in our lifetime that it ever did snow there. It may have snowed there one other time since. I know it did in the foothills, but just the coincidence. It seems like psychedelic experiences and me are very coincidental. The first time I took LSD was the day of the Great Alaska Earthquake in '64, which was also the day that Ken Babbs came up with the idea of the Merry Pranksters.
Well, I mean, but you said something to me in our first interview about you can really only improve yourself and then hope that somebody else notices and that has an impact on them. We're at a precarious time right now in civilization. You talk to people about who might say, changing myself and impacting, but can you talk about the ripple effect and how you've seen it transpire in your own existence?
Yeah, it's a thing. Well, Cassidy talked a lot about Edgar Cayce. And Casey said repeatedly, the only way that you change the world is by changing yourself. You don't change other people. Telling other people to change, trying to get other people to change is futile. The only way you get anybody else to change is by example. And so what we have tried to do is live a good example. Try to be loving, caring people. Try to see positive in stuff. Try to influence people in positive ways. It's a fine line. You can't just acquiesce in everything and be totally complacent and just let shit happen. But on the other hand, you can't go around telling people, you got to be this way, you got to be that way. So where's the line in there? And that's the hard thing, is to understand that the only way to do it, to really make people better, is to be better. And yet you can't just let things go. You have to point out, pay attention, people. There's shit going down, and it's not good stuff. We're at a time of crisis, at least of great change and potential crisis, not only in America, but in the whole world. We have to evolve. Everything that we've done, all the stuff that the Merry Pranksters did, that the Beats did, that music is about, dance, art, all this stuff is about elevating your consciousness. It's about achieving higher states of mind. And it's about evolution, because constantly experiencing or striving to experience a higher state of consciousness is the way toward evolution. And it's not going to happen to any of us in one lifetime. It's a repetitive thing, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Cassidy talked a lot about karma and reincarnation, and at the time, I just thought, oh yeah, right.
No, but you were riffing on this, man. The more that you put forward what you're talking about, the better off you're going to be when you reincarnate.
Exactly. And to keep in mind, you ain't done. You drop dead, you ain't done. You just move from one house, and then you do something else, and you get ready, pack your gear, and get ready to move into the next one. And it may take a year, it may take a month, it may take 200 years. But eventually, we're doing it some more. It's a weird game. Most of us don't even know we're playing the game. Those of us that do know don't know the rules. We're forbidden to know the rules of the game, but we're required to play it. And the consequences are bigger than any other game that we can play. And so it's that's what life is about. That's why it's so difficult. We don't know the rules of the game. We have to play the game, and the consequences are monumental. So what we need to do, we need to think in terms of higher levels of consciousness as much as we can. We try to be that loving person, that caring person, that person trying to put out the positive vibe all the time, whenever you can, but not to acquiesce, not to just say, oh, that's fine, I don't care if they destroy the fucking world, because we live here. We have to care.
You just played with David Amram, Babs said?
Yes, I did.
Okay, Amram's a dear friend. I mean, I cannot believe you just played with him. I mean, this is unbelievable.
Oh, yeah, we had a great time. He was at the Lowell...
What was he playing, French horn or what? I mean, was he...
Oh, he had his whole band there. He was playing piano. He had his whole band, the quartet or quintet. It was the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. It was the last event of the weekend.
Yeah.
The open mic event where people sign up, get to come and do their thing, whatever it is. But his band is sitting there accompanying everybody in turn as they come up. Poets, people reading prose, people playing music, people singing with instruments, whatever. And the band would accompany them. And so when my turn came, I read this poem that I've written about Cassidy's death. But I didn't just read the poem. It's a very short poem. It's only one page. But I punctuated it with the axephone. I'd read a couple lines, and it's a kind of a sad poem. It's about his death. And so I'd play a couple of bluesy notes on the axephone, and I had a microphone so it was amplified and it really played. And then I'd read some more, and then I'd play a few more notes. And he's playing the piano, and the band is riffing this jazz stuff behind it. And then I got to the end of it, and then I just went off on this long bluesy solo, and David starts scat singing behind it and playing the piano. And it was just awesome. It was one of the high points of my life, because it was so cool, it was so good, and they are so good. He's such an incredible musician, and he's got a great band. And so, they're able to make anything sound great. And so we sounded really good. And afterwards, we had a long talk, and he loved it. He said, that was awesome. That thing is so cool. You were great. We loved it. And so we agreed we're going to meet again in February at the Cassidy Birthday Bash, February 9th in Denver. So be there.
Yeah, we'll be there and be here now. And Walker, don't forget about the blues, man.
Don't forget about
All right,
the blues.
And much
man.
love to you, man. Thank you for taking the time on the Jake Feinberg show, dude.
Yeah, blow the blues, people. Inside, outside, upside down, but blow the blues and keep smiling.
We'll see you all in a little bit.
Love you all. I love everybody.
Peace.